I'm so excited to be here this afternoon talking about one of the things that I think Ann and I spent a lot of time with clients going through, reminding them about, working them through, and that is the brain's bias for negativity. There are three questions that I'm going to tackle in today's discussion. First and foremost, why do I always put myself down? Why am I always putting myself down? Why am I thinking the worst about myself, right? And second question, how do I turn off that constant criticism that seems to be forever running through my head? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to spend a little bit of time getting to that. And then last but not least, and we hear this all the time, and I'm guilty of it completely, totally. I do this. I've done this myself for years until I finally realized that it doesn't quite work like this. But shouldn't I just be able to think positive thoughts, right? So if we're thinking negatively, if we're criticizing ourselves, we're aware of that inner critic that's, running a little bit on the hamster wheel, shouldn't I just be able to think positive thoughts? Because if I think positive thoughts, then my negative thoughts will get credited out, right? And they'll just go away. If only it were that easy. So we talk a lot about the brain's bias for negativity because the more you understand this, the more you understand how your brain is actually wired to work naturally, the easier it is for you to actually kind of set your path out and get on the road to actually being able to break some of these standing patterns of behavior and what we call ants, or automatic negative thoughts. So if you've done any of the imposter training with us, we do spend a lot of time talking about those automatic negative thoughts because they come up and they get triggered over and over and over again depending on the situation. So let's start with the first one. Why do I always put myself down? Or why do I always think the worst of myself? And as I was reflecting on this question and trying to think of, some examples, the one that kept popping up into my mind was my daughter as she was growing up, interestingly enough. And being raised in a household where we've talked always about the brain and our personalities and how our brains are hardwired and all of those elements, I remember whenever she was at her peak of frustration, what would come out from her would be stupid, stupid, stupid. And it would often be combined with some of this or some, moving to bang on the wall. And it would always be a little bit jarring because I think as a parent, never said that to my children. In fact, I've always said the opposite. I've always talked about different kinds of smart. It's not a word that we ever used in our household. And yet there it was. And, I think from the time she was about 6, right? And it was always in relation to something that she was struggling with, that someplace where she thought it should be easy, or maybe that it should come more naturally, or where she made a mistake and she was getting feedback around that, the fact that she'd made that mistake. And that was her automatic response. Stupid, stupid, stupid. How many of you can relate, right? And maybe it's not stupid, 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 but it's something else, right? I mean, I know for me, I talked about this last week. It was always I should have known. I should have done better. I should have figured it out beforehand. I shoulda, right? And everybody has sort of their own message track that comes out around that self-criticism, right? And if you're brave enough to share, it's always great to hear what other people have going on in their track, because that reminds us that we're not alone, and this is something that many of us, in fact, more than 70% of us, struggle with, okay? So while you're thinking about yours, right, what's your sort of constant put down, or, where you get triggered into thinking the worst about yourself? And I'm going to tell you something that is really important to remind yourself all of the time, which is the average brain. If you think about all of us, our average brain thinks between 12,000 and 60,000 thoughts a day. So imagine that. It's just like speeding through them, right? It's like going and going. And a lot of those thoughts that are flying through our head are not conscious thoughts. It's that unconscious, automatic thinking that goes on in our head on a day-to-day basis. 80% of those thoughts, so 12,000 to 60,000, that's a lot. But here's an even bigger number. 80% of those thoughts are negative. Automatically. It is the way the brain is designed to work. So 80%. So when you think about that, is your brain is naturally set up to spend 80% of its day thinking negative thoughts. So it's not surprising that we find ourselves in this pattern or in this habit of always putting ourselves down. right? Or always thinking the worst about ourselves, because that negativity gets triggered up so quickly and so easily. So I'll go back to that example of my daughter where she didn't learn that from anywhere. She never heard that. I mean, probably she heard that at school or somewhere else, right? Watching TV, somewhere she picked it up. But that was what was getting triggered automatically in her, not, oh, well, what might I do differently next time? Or how can I learn from that? Or am I really being stupid? Or did I just not know because I'm 6 or I'm 8 or I'm 12 or whatever the age was, right? So think about it from that perspective. So 80%, now here's the other thing. Whatever we think today, whatever thoughts are running through our head today, we're going to think again tomorrow. Those exact same thoughts. So if we started very early on thinking certain thoughts or telling ourselves certain things like, I'm not very smart. I know that was one for me because I struggled in school. School did not come easy for me. In grade school, I found it very challenging. I found it very challenging to deal with some of the teachers and some of the memorization in particular. And when I compared myself with other kids, which of course is what we do with the imposter syndrome, we compare ourselves, and who could learn things really fast and really easily, it was that I'm not very smart. And so that it's like, oh, here I am, I'm being really stupid, this is dumb of me. And again, that language wasn't also uncommon, right? For even teachers to use sometimes when they were talking about kids. So whatever we thought today, we're going to think tomorrow. And 90% of what we think today is the same thing, the exact same thing that we thought about yesterday. So see the pattern, right? So whatever those thoughts are that we're thinking, whatever thoughts that there are that we have been thinking for years and years, the things we tell ourselves, the way we talk to ourselves, we just keep having that same conversation over and over and over again. It's kind of like Groundhog Day, right? Isn't that what they do? Conversations not quite the same, but you're going through the same day over and over again. Our brains are like that, but they are hardwired to do that. And because we do that, because we're having that same negative conversation with ourselves over and over again, we're doing that same put downs, that same criticism, then we build that neural pathway. And then it gets set and it gets wired in, and then it becomes so automatic that it gets triggered and we're not even thinking about it. And there it is in our head, and we respond to it as though it's true. So does that make sense to everyone? And can you see that? Can you think back, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, depending on your age, and think about some of those negative thoughts or self-criticism that you've been maybe saying to yourself and internally for years and years and years, right? And just doing it automatically gets triggered. I think the big one for me was always the I should, because if I could know everything before anything happened, then I would be able to avoid all of the negative situations that I didn't want to have or experience, right? So that's why we're always doing it though. That's it. Our brain, it's like full throttle, full steam ahead, negative thoughts. Let's go for it. Okay. So the second question that we wanted to talk about is, how do I turn off the constant criticism, right? So that is that, you can think about it. I'm not pretty enough. I don't look good enough. I'm not smart enough. I don't have enough ideas to say. I shouldn't be here. Whatever again is that constant criticism that's running through your head. And how do we turn it off? And a lot of the times there is this idea that we should just be able to, like it's a switch, and we can just flick it off. And we can just say, okay, criticism, bye-bye, I don't need you anymore. Let's just sort of kick you out. But if that, again, we always say if it were that easy, we'd all be doing it. None of us would be struggling with that constant criticism. And unfortunately, when we're always in that state of criticizing ourselves, then we are undermining our confidence. We are holding ourselves back. We're keeping our lives small because we feel compelled to play it safe. And this is, again, an indication, that constant criticism, that our brain is hard at work, because our brains are wired for survival. Okay? And survival means that the brain is going to do everything in its power to tell you messages and send you messages and say things to you that keep you safe, right? And whatever threat the brain perceives, whether it's real or not, is in there. And the constant criticism and the foundation for that actually gets set up very early on in our development in childhood. We learned certain things, or we had certain experiences that our brains interpreted as needing, that we needed protection from, that we needed psychological protection from. And so as a result of that, now when we are in a similar situation, when we're facing that, we have these other voices often running through our heads in terms of that constant criticism. So if you were told, for example, and I've heard this one a lot from clients, a particular personality styles in particular, is know your place. Or who do you think you are, right? And so then that criticism gets sort of regurgitated in us as adults, even though there's actually no threat to our psychological safety, that criticism comes back in. But now it's our voice, and we often don't realize that that criticism got set up in there from someone else's voice. But again, it's that survival instinct that's getting triggered. Fear is a far more powerful motivator than anything else. And what our brains are trying to do is avoid the sticks, right? They're trying to avoid anything that may be ultimately problematic for us or threaten our survival, right? So can you think about, and I see Jacinta saying, yeah, never smart enough, right? And it's there, even though we're really smart, talented, capable individuals, none of this criticism is real. None of this negative thinking, it's not real. And we never stop to go, is that true? Because again, it's automatic. It's automatically being generated. The pathway's there. It's set up in our brain. And so if you think about it, like our brain has a built-in apparatus, which essentially is super sensitive to any negativity. And one of the ones that, I always think about is I think my sense of humor and my confidence in my sense of humor got cultivated really late. And so I was one of those individuals when I was growing up where it's like I wouldn't say anything. Like if I wasn't absolutely sure that what I had to say was smart or funny or interesting in some way, I just wouldn't say anything. And then as I got a little bit older and I thought, okay, well, I need to sort of, spread my wings a little bit. And I would say something and maybe it wouldn't have the reaction that I was expecting or someone didn't hear it. Or even in my own head, I'm thinking, why did I say that? Oh my God, that's so embarrassing. I can't believe I just said that. And so this jumping on myself, and I'm sure nobody else in the room thought more than a heartbeat for it. But I could spend hours, again, stuck in that constant loop of criticism, just chastising myself for having sort of blurted something out in a way that it wasn't as smooth or as polished, or I would always compare myself to those people who can just sort of have those jokes and those comments sort of flying off their tongue. And whereas my communication was always much more deliberate because of the way I had developed and my personality. So if you think about it as our brain has apparatus that's totally built in, super sensitive to negativity, and so it's always got this bad news bias, basically. So it's always looking for, what did we do wrong? What went wrong? How do we protect ourselves? How do we keep ourselves surviving? And that's always going on in the background. That's always at work for us, right? So can you relate to that? Are you aware of when you're getting triggered into it? Are you conscious when you've shifted into that place of constant criticism? Give me a thumbs up if you can agree with that, if you're starting to see it. Obviously, you're here, you're curious about, sort of why is this negativity going on through us. When I was growing up, I grew up with a mother who was very much into all things kind of self-help and sort of understanding. And I pulled this example out because I remember a couple of books on our bookcase. And I was very aware from a young age of my sort of constant negative inner dialogue around myself. But she had books on her shelf like I'm Okay, You're Okay, and The Power of Positive Thinking. And so you sort of get this idea that if you just tell yourself that you're okay and that there's nothing wrong with you, or if you just think powerful, positive thoughts, then everything that is negative, anything that you might be thinking negatively about yourself, anything from a mindset perspective that might be getting in your way, is just going to somehow disappear. It's just going to get pushed out. And it's an interesting notion, right? And I still hear a lot of people who will say that. And I mean, again, I'm guilty of it. I know sort of all through my 30s saying, I just want to fix it, right? I just want to fix it. Just tell me what to do, then I need to fix it. And this goes to the third and final question, which is, shouldn't I just be able to replace my negative thoughts with positive thoughts? And the answer is no. The answer is no. And when we believe that, when we hold on to that belief, then we get stuck, because that is not the way the brain works. And because it's the brain's bias for negativity that we're working with, it's not about us personally. Every person's brain has this. It's just that we have not learned and trained and developed ourselves to be able to change the conversation, to challenge those negative thoughts, to look at them as, are they helpful or are they unhelpful, to be able to work with the information. So if I have a negative thought that comes in and I tell myself, don't think like that, it actually gives the negative thought more energy, not less. If I have a negative thought that comes in, like says, Jay, you're not really smart, I can look at that and say, I need to challenge that. Where's the proof? Where's the evidence? why do I believe that to be true about myself? And is that actually true? And, I grew up with this one in particular, even though my teachers were always giving me feedback to the contrary, even though my experiences at school ultimately were giving me experiences to the contrary. Fundamentally, my belief was always that I was never smart enough, that there was in some way that I had to be, there was something wrong with me, that again, the imposter syndrome, not good enough, right? And so, but I never challenged it. And it was not until I was in my late 20s where I really started to understand more about the brain and more about why there was such a disconnect between, sort of my actual intellectual horsepower and how I felt about my own capacity or my own smartness, right? And I think, again, some of that comes from our experiences. Well, I know it comes from our experiences in childhood and how we sort people from a very young age as to what qualifies as smart and not smart, okay? But shouldn't I just be able to replace them with positive thoughts? No. We have to be able to challenge them. We have to be able to change that conversation that we're having with ourselves. And I listen to some of the things that my clients tell me that they say to themselves, and you can totally relate to this as well. And so ask yourself as I go through this, when I listen to the things that they're saying, the way they talk about themselves, the way they beat themselves up over things, all of that negative talk, I know they would never in a million years talk to anybody else like that. They just wouldn't, right? It would, what they say to other people is, oh, you're so great and you're so wonderful and, this was really exceptional what you did here. But when it comes to themselves, their conversation with themselves is completely different. And so that contrast is so massive. And so it's like, well, you have the ability to have that other kind of conversation and to look at people in a more objective way. We have to change that conversation so we're doing the same for ourselves. Can any of you relate to that? But think about the way you talk about to yourself as being so fundamentally different from how you would ever talk to anybody else, whether it be friend, family, coworker, employee, even your boss, right? Even your spouse, right? So it's just being really aware of the difference in the conversation that we have with ourselves versus what we have with others, okay? So we have to change the conversation, okay? We have to challenge those negative thoughts, not just try and park them, not beat ourselves up because we're having the negative thought, not even try to, sort of ignore them or avoid them, but as they come up, challenge them. It's in the challenging of them that we actually start to think about the truth and what is real, right? And we can then move away from that automatic negative thought and focus on objective information. If we're saying to ourselves, I really suck at my job, it's like, well, on what basis? And what criteria am I using? And how do I determine success in my job, right? And so when we start to look at it in that more objective way, we can bring it out of that survival automatic negative pattern, that again, of that bias for negativity, that constant self-criticism, and actually be able to work with the reality of what we're experiencing, okay? We have to then replace them, okay? So replacing that thought, right? That negative thought with a positive one, right? Which is what might that be? So again, if we go back to that example of, I suck at my job, for lack of a better one, it's like, that's not true. It's like, but I'm really good at this. I do an exceptional job of creating new ideas. I'm phenomenal at getting diverse people together and getting them to collaborate. But right now I'm feeling like I don't have enough of a plan or I don't have enough control. And that's why this thought is being triggered. So what do I need to do to move myself out of that? So you see the process that goes into it. So it's not just, I need to think great thoughts or positive thoughts and my negative thoughts will go away. There's actual work that needs to be done and we need to do it consistently. As Anne always reminding us, it's that there is a long period of time. I believe it's 45 days. I think Anne might still be on here and she can give me a thumbs up if I got the number of days correct because I always forget. We have to do it consistently. So if we're actually going to repattern that neural pathway in our brain that's keeping us in that place of the negativity, we have to constantly or consistently and consciously go through that process, right? Change the conversation. We're working to change the conversation. We're going to challenge the negative thought. We're going to look at it. Is it helpful? Is it unhelpful? We're going to replace them. What is the reality? What's the truth? What's the objective information? And we're going to keep on doing that. And then what happens is we have new pathways. And those automatic thoughts that have been coming for years and years, all of a sudden, after those 45 days of consistent practice, are going to stop. They're going to fade away. And so if I look at where I am now with the work that we've done over the years is I never questioned my intellect, but all the way through my teens, absolutely, into my 20s, probably my late 20s, and then definitely by my early 30s. It was like I was able to start looking at myself very differently. And in fact, I understood how different my intellect was from others. So not only did I no longer think of myself as not being smart enough, is I really started to understand and appreciate my gifts and talents, and being able to move along the spectrum from in the imposter syndrome, because I was able to replace that automatic negative thought. I was able to change the conversation with myself and actually have confidence and ownership in my actual intellectual capability. And it's really empowering. And that's the piece, because when you understand that, and then you're no longer having those negative thoughts, and you're not holding yourself back, you're not questioning yourself, you're not wondering whether or not you can do it, whether you can go after that next job, or whether you can go out on your own, or whatever it is that is in your vision. As we change that conversation, as we replace those automatic negative thoughts, we actually open ourselves up to self-actualize. We actually open ourselves up to allow our authentic selves to emerge, and that's what this is all about.